Episode 64 opens with a continuation of the Reiner flashback before their attack on Trost. Burrito again talks about how he's still having that same dream of the man on the farm. As a reminder, the man's story was left open-ended, and we never get a 100% concrete answer as to why he told the story to them. Though considering he talks about how he fled and left his children to die, I think the most likely explanation is just guilt. And so, Annie mutters that he must have wanted forgiveness, but adds that after they left Marcel, they were in no position to offer it to anyone. If we jump ahead in Annie's story, I think you can view this as a projection of her own desires. Once freed from the shell, she too immediately explained absolutely everything without ever being prompted to. Balatro, however, offers his own interpretation, saying he believes that what he actually sought was judgment. This introduces this episode's core question. What is judgment? What is atonement? What is forgiveness? And who is the arbiter capable of delivering that judgment? As we've discussed many times before, and will continue to do so with Eren's arc and Marley, Isayama always personified mass destruction and death within a single character so as to not lose that immediate emotional reaction. For Bertolt, this man he keeps having dreams about is his guilt personified. He is the one who is responsible for his children's death. He's responsible for the man's deaths and of the hundreds of thousands in Walmaria. And so, with that theme established, we smash cut to Reiner as he stands before Eren, aka his hour of judgment, his recurring nightmare, and his source of guilt. Okay, that's enough seriousness. The soundtrack in this entire sequence is so good. The horror music creeping in, and then those drums building, it's so good! As for the title of the episode, A Declaration of War! I mean, yeah, this episode is the formal start of what is effectively the Second Great Titan War, and it's like really bad. Moving into the episode, we open with Willy behind the scenes doing the admittedly very tropey look into the mirror that, of course, always implies some kind of inner turmoil. In this case, that is doubly true because right behind him, we see the women preparing their makeup, which involves being entirely covered in blood. In this case, that is for show, yes, but it is also very blatant foreshadowing. Not only is Willy wrestling with what his judgment will look like, he also knows that his actions will directly result in a whole lot of completely innocent deaths, mothers and their children included. Shortly after, Atsumabito along with her men in black show up to give their regards. Personally, I always read the scene as her just wanting to make sure that nothing has changed before she takes her leave. She notices that Willy is sweating bullets, and his excuse of stage fright makes like zero sense because we've seen his public speaking ability, and he most certainly doesn't have stage fright. So to her, this is a confirmation that whatever's going to happen in the festival is an orchestrated effort from most likely both sides, and she just doesn't really want to be there. She's obviously unaware of Magat's and Willy's plans, but she is at least somewhat aware of what's going on with Paradis. In just a few scenes, we see her just calmly leave Liberia altogether. So with the events of the previous episode and now her actions in this one, it's pretty safe to say that one of the quote-unquote rats in the house has already managed to outwit all of Magat's plans. As we get to Eren, he says he found some good seats, saying they're right underneath the apartment building full of ordinary people waiting for the show. Keep this in mind for later because this is a very important detail that I think a ton of people just completely forget about.
Mr. Kruger, did you cut your hand?
This is very funny because, oh my poor boy, you innocent soul. But as of now, Eren is just threatening Reiner with hostages. The thing is, as much as I meme about Falco being a naive little lad, I think planting us in what is largely his point of view was an absolute stroke of genius here. Eren calmly, but very firmly telling Reiner to sit down, and really every passing second is just filled with tension. Looking back, we tend to focus on the conversation between the two, and of course the titular climax that is the declaration of war, because, you know, it's like really cool. But we as the audience, at this point in time, do not know who this Eren even is. Thus far in the season, he has been a POV character for all of 2 minutes, and said 2 minutes involved him making his own grandfather rip his face apart. Despite the interactions we've seen with Falco, when this episode first came out, I really don't think you could be certain that he valued Falco's life, or really any other life for that matter. This Eren is a cold and calculating manipulator who has, and will continue to say, whatever he needs to get what he wants. I think that's why we share Falco's perspective. These past couple of episodes showed us that Reiner is just a cool uncle, but at the same time, we were also constantly reminded of the scars that created this Eren. And so, just like Falco, we as the audience are kind of right in between the two. Before rejoining our two best buddies catching up, we cut to Reiner's mom meeting Annie's dad. We then see them catch up a little, and while we don't know much about their relationship, I think it only makes sense that the parents whose children were turned into one of 9 human weapons get to know each other because, well, there's not a lot of people who can really relate to that. And the tragic flip side of that coin is Leonhart's comment about them not seeing each other much since Reiner arrived, because his daughter, she never did. Suddenly, the only people who he could talk to about their kids and their joint struggles are now preoccupied with other things. Really not much else to add there, that's just like, big sad. He also notes that Hoover, that being Broccoli's dad, recently passed away in his sleep. Considering the timing and Balatro not returning, I think you could suspect that it wasn't just passing away in his sleep. Or maybe you could also read it as him having held out hopes of him returning, but when he learned that he is just gone, his body just succumbed to grief. We don't know for sure, but I think it is decently likely. Arguably the most important thing here is Karina going to offer sympathy, saying she's sure Annie, but she's promptly cut off, with Leonhart saying that she is not dead and that she promised to come back. Number 1, again, this is just big sad. But it is also big true, because she is not dead. And that leads to number 2, I am still curious about whether or not Isayama ever changed plans regarding Annie. This entire conversation right here is reminding us that Annie even exists and that she is still a gun on the wall. Practically speaking, Basketball died, so Hoover is only mentioned in passing. You could already see who Isayama is focusing on because Leonhart is still important and is still putting his bets on Annie. But at the same time, she is only relevant super late into the story and thus becomes a Chekhov's musket. I'd love to see him talk about Annie because I do suspect that there might have been extra stories with her that for some reason were scrapped. There is just too much reminding that she exists, and Isayama doesn't do false promises, so I do think this was supposed to lead somewhere slightly earlier. Not sure though, that's just a vibe. As we cut to Magath, we see the station military and their pretty extensive recon. An attack is exactly what Magath and Willie both want, but this large-scale operation reporting absolutely everything potentially sus is still a must since they would still need to react. Absolute best case scenario is them just taking down Parody right here. Is it likely? Probably not, they're still not even sure of which Titans they control. Worst case scenario is they just drain their resources as much as possible before retaliating with the Global Alliance. So yes, they are baiting out this attack, but it's not like they're just going to take it and that's it. And speaking of the attack, when we hop on over to the Warriors, all in awe of what they're seeing, we get a few lines that basically reveal everything going on here. They say they never expected to see the heart of the Marley military, saying even Marshal Culvey is here. And of course, note that they're all neatly bunched up. Every single person with stripes and honor badges are all a part of the big honeypot that is Willie and Magath's purging of the Marleyan military. And on top of that, they also note how there are ambassadors and famous families from all over the world. In other words, these are the tragic survivors who would carry the message of this horrifying raid far and wide, even further amplifying Willie's martyrdom and, again, supporting the Alliance's mission against Parody. And to conclude this, we even get this super on the nose line of, the Tiber family's influence is something else. Everything from the invite to the seating arrangement to this taking place in the internment zone is all a part of the stage play that Willie is orchestrating. The Parody forces will attack their fellow Eldians, they're going to wipe out the entire Marleyan military, and all of these ambassadors will carry this message far and wide. Everything here is designed to make Parody the ultimate villains of the Earth.
This video is sponsored by ExpressVPN.
You know what I really don't like? Region blocking. Spending time on the internet, and sometimes right here in the YouTube comments, someone will recommend me a show, I'll go to the streaming platform and see that it's not even there. Why? I don't know why, because region blocking. Just looking at the content I create, neither Avatar or Attack on Titan is available here, while being perfectly accessible in a list of other countries. I could start searching around which platform might have gotten it here as well, or I could just get my money's worth by using ExpressVPN. No, like seriously, Netflix has over 18,000 titles. Only 7,000 of those are available in the US, and that is just one platform. There are these as well. ExpressVPN allows you to instantly change your location and access all of that hidden content, while potentially also getting you a better deal because the prices, those are not the same either. Computer, phone, tablet, TVs, laptops, it doesn't matter. It works seamlessly absolutely everywhere. With just a couple of clicks, your connection will be routed through a secure server to mask your original location, while never slowing down your browsing speed. Using ExpressVPN also has the added benefit of keeping your browsing a lot more anonymous and secure. I think we have all seen enough data breaches to know advertisers and big tech, they want to know everything about you. Stop paying full price for streaming services while only getting a fraction of the content. Get your money's worth with ExpressVPN. Find out how you can get 4 months free by scanning the QR code on screen, by clicking the link in the description, or by going to expressvpn.com/Koroto. Thank you again to ExpressVPN for sponsoring this video, and back to the episode. They're not the only ones making plans, because we then see a highly sus soldier, aka Yelena, calling on the warriors and saying that Magath has summoned them. There's not really much of a mystery here, considering the trap is revealed in this episode. But her obviously hiding her face, Peak already glaring at her, and us never being shown Zeke's eyes are all clues that this is indeed the counterplay to Willie's plan. Considering we already saw the baseball in the previous episode, it's not much of a stretch to already suspect that this is indeed Eren and Zeke working together, which in hindsight, we know to be the case. As we cut back to Eren and Reiner, it's quiet. Uncomfortably so. I could gush about the direction here for a long time, but I'll keep it brief and say that even watching this right now and knowing where all this goes, I genuinely sit here with a big stupid grin because it's just so good. Every passing second feels like a deliberate choice to just up the suspense. And once it feels like it's all going to explode in spectacular fashion, it doesn't. Instead, we just get these few lines, which we'll talk about in a second, and then we're right back to just building and building. It's so good. It's that same constant dance with the viewer that I've talked about many times before. At each and every turn, we are being challenged by the show. Before we get to their conversation, I think it's also important to briefly sketch in Falco's role here. The season began with him as the primary POV character. We then briefly faded to our good old buddy Reiner, but for these past couple of episodes, we are right back to Falco. In this episode, I think the reason for that becomes crystal clear. Suddenly, our perspective is planted firmly in the middle of these two very familiar and not quite in the same ways, but trustworthy people. And so, Reiner finally speaks, simply asking, "How? Why are you here?" Eren responds with a equally simple, "Same as you." At this point in the episode, that seems to imply that it's about revenge and nothing more. He's taken all of these people, including Reiner, hostage. This is about to become their Shiganshina. To be fair, that is also true. But also remember that this episode is about individuals pleading for judgment, so there is a lot more to this. Reiner just immediately crumbles. It's easy to overlook now that we know where all of this is headed, but remember that Reiner was already getting his disassociative episodes in Trost with Marco, in Season 2 Atop the Wall, and later in the Forest. But even so, he always kept moving forward. In Shiganshina, he was perfectly fine. Remember the entire horse thing and not falling for any kind of bait? He was just like 100% there. So in this situation, we share much of Falco's perspective. We don't know what's going on in either one of their heads. How is it that coming face to face with Eren has him just immediately fold when he never did before? How is Eren so calm? Why is there no resentment whatsoever? But as Reiner is struggling to even breathe, Eren continues by saying he didn't have a choice, just like Reiner didn't. But wait, Ryanair and Mr. Yeag Kruger, because it is time for a history lesson. Willie's play is a mixture of truth wrapped in a little bit of propaganda and a few blatant lies here and there, so let's dig into it. Approximately a century ago, Eldia ruled the world with Titans. Between the founder Ymir and present day, Titans have stolen the lives of so many people that the present day population of the world could die thrice over and still not compare. Most of that, based on Paradise's history, does appear to be true. The only part that seems to be more than a little odd is the present-day population could die thrice over and still not compare. To me, that seems like a very big over-exaggeration. Population growth has always been exponential for, well, basic math reasons. But even more than that, it became like hyper-exponential in the industrial era. There are many reasons for that, most of all access to medicine and actual infrastructure, but that's not really important now. Point is, population growth is exponential. So let's take World War II. It's not quite 100 years ago as it is in Attack on Titan, but 80-ish, close enough. This is not going to be like a perfect comparison because ideally we would have gone 100 years back from World War I-ish because then we would have been like more in line with Attack on Titan, but bear with me here. It is the deadliest war in history. It involved weaponry that could very easily hold back the rumbling and resulted in 80-ish million deaths. The population at the time stood at 2-point-something billion, and 80 years later stands at 8 billion. So, 80 years, you go from 2 billion to 8 billion, and the war killed 80 million. Willie's math does not math, like, at all. But okay, fair enough, Willie said from Emir's day to present day, we are just talking about World War II. Let's go back 2,000 years. Obviously, historical records will be a lot more sparse. But even if you add all of them up, you're still not going to pass World War II alone by that much, because the total population of the world was just so much smaller. When those older wars were happening, the share of the planet affected was much larger. But in terms of absolute figures, it's not going to pass World War II. My point being, this die thrice over and still not compare just doesn't really add up based on the real world. Even taking the upper estimates of every single war we've ever had, it still just doesn't add up. Personally, I think it's just subtle propaganda that people will accept, because grasping numbers of that scale, it just becomes impossible. Like, what is 200 million, 2 billion, 800 million? All of it is just a big number. Then again, while the world of Attack on Titan is a reflection of our own world, it is never implied that population densities, or really the population as a whole, is also a reflection of our own world. If anything, it should be drastically different. So there is a chance that the constant wars have indeed outweighed population growth spurred by technological development and modern-ish infrastructure. If it was just war 24/7, I guess Attack on Titan doesn't have boomers, which sounds like a joke, but it's also kinda not. But still, I highly doubt that the Titans have killed a minimum of 6 billion people. That just doesn't seem legit at all. Yes, I am well aware that this is overanalyzing to the power of 15, but we'll actually return to this point with a rumbling, so keep this in mind. One thing that needs no overanalyzing, though, is this shot of Willie standing amongst the bloodstained people, because this is absolute cinema. It also works as a very good visual representation of his guilt that came from his inaction. All of that blood and all of those ghosts, they loom over him as he stands there, alone, not doing a thing. He then goes on to talk about how the only history they have is that of Eldia, saying that the rest was simply destroyed. He adds that after Eldia ran out of enemies, they turned on their own kind, thereby starting the Great Titan War. Number 1, please Isayama, write a prequel, call it A Song of Man and Titan, call it The House of the Titan, call it whatever, I don't know, but just please do it. Regarding the history though, this is kinda true, but also kinda not. That part of history is kind of murky, and we never get a truly unbiased recount of it, but we know that, once upon a time, Marley was a powerful nation that was subjugated by Fritz's war machine led by Ymir herself. Though most yielded, one just refused to bow and attempted an assassination. Problem is, Ymir leapt in front of the spear. Only then did the Titan splitting process and the Dark Ages begin, and eventually also the Great Titan War. What he chooses to omit is Marley's involvement in that same conflict. He makes it sound like all other Eldians were just jumping at the opportunity to fight each other. In reality, Marley also used those same Eldians in their own war efforts and eventually covered all of that up with the convenient legend that is Helos. And if you really wanted to overanalyze, you might also think that he chooses to omit the original Titan splitting process because the story of Marley's uprising is very similar to Ymir's uprising, and that is very similar to Paradise's uprising right now. Ymir just wanted to live and wanted to be free. That Marleyan soldier wanted to live and he wanted Marley to be free. And Paradis also just wants to live and wants to be free. So TLDR, yes, it is a never-ending cycle of misery where the characters who want to change something just end up doing the same thing again, because that's just what humanity is, just a cycle of misery. But he then recounts the legend of Helos and says that the only reason the rumbling hasn't happened yet is just pure luck. All of that is obviously pure fiction, and he'd reveal the truth in just a second. Now, if you look at the video subsection, you'll notice something real goofy, because I have no idea how to describe this. Everything from this point on plays out almost like a play, or even a documentary. The strings in the background constantly escalate as we go from Willie, to Eren, to Yelena, to Magath. It just keeps adding more and more and more, it's unrelenting.
その脅威を排除すべく4体の巨人を島に送り込み聞いたかライナー
イエーガーはそのまま正門に行け
何か異常は
今のところ報告はありません
なんだこれはなんでブラウン副長
As we cut to Eren, note that the camera has flipped, and we are now literally watching from Falco's point of view. Like we later see big parts of the war for Paradis unfold from his and Gabby's point of view, this is the show blatantly showing us that this is not a team sport where you follow the guy you like most. Falco likes both of them, but here he is, standing right in between the two, and he doesn't know which is the right one. And to play that up even more, Eren very calmly just says, "It makes sense. That's why you destroyed the walls, right? You were trying to save the world." But just as abruptly, the realization sets in for Falco because old friends, if it's more than 4 years, then that's Paradis. At this very moment, he doesn't know what to think because a devil of Paradis, one who the hero Reiner was sent to vanquish, and Falco's good friend Mr. Kruger is sitting right here and calmly talking to them. He is witnessing a contradiction happening right in front of his eyes, and he doesn't know what's real anymore. And in the background, we constantly hear Willie's history lesson, and all of that just makes it all the more confusing. At the same time, Yelena is still leading the warriors, but also tells Zeke that he was called for at the gates. That is just to separate him up since, he's not meant to fall in the hole. But Peak then notes that she feels like she's seen them before, which she almost certainly has because Yelena is also a part of the Marleyan military. That is why the show is also not showing Yelena's face to us. It's to tell us that they are trying to be sneaky because they could genuinely be recognized. We even get this note about her wanting to compliment her beard, again pointing out this weird thing that seems kinda sus. And on top of all of that, she then runs to hug the Panzer Squad, which is very much out of the norm for her. In reality, she just needs to get close so that she can whisper that, "Hold up, this guy very, very sus, make sure we don't die, please follow us." So what we've learned here is that Peak is apparently the only person actually paying attention to things because Porco, I think he could be led into anywhere and he'd just be like, "Yeah, sure, let's go." But once the actual trap is revealed, I think everything starts to fall into place. At this point, you can confidently say that this is way more than just the scouts on Paradis planning this attack. There has to be a big contingent within Marley working on whatever this plan is, just like Magath suspected. At this point, the prime suspect would be Atsumobito because she just left. And while she is partly involved, we of course know that this is not really her, this is Yelena, and this is Zeke. But point is, the trap right here isn't just like a small thing to slow them down or inconvenience them. This is a fully thought out construction to completely disable a shifter's ability to do anything. If one of them transforms, the other will be squished instantly. The whole thing is brick, so there is zero chance of breaking out. We have seen partial transformations before, but it's hard to say how that would work out, and it's probably not worth the risk. So whoever is involved had the time, had the resources, had the knowledge, and had the contacts to make all of this happen. So yes, this is a big, big group. As we return to Willie, he concludes this first act by saying that this is common knowledge. Again, these are not facts, this is just Marley's version of taught history. And so, that is when he says that the truth is slightly different, saying alongside the Warhammer, they also inherit the world's true history. This is another direct parallel to the royal family and the founding titan of Paradis, with Historia's name being, quite literally, history. He then proclaims that neither Helos nor the Tibers ended the war, rather, it was Fritz himself. He says that the king came to regret the savage history of Eldia and grieve for the nations oppressed under the Titans. Based on what we know from Paradis, this is true. King Fritz believed that the sins of the Eldians were too great, and so he created this paradise that was just ignorant bliss. He took away their memories, hoping that they would live out their days on this small island with no issues whatsoever and eventually just fade away. As we know, that didn't really work, and the only thing it achieved was stroking his own ego because, wow, he created this ignorant bliss and apparently he has solved all problems, but he didn't. The people of Paradis, they were miserable, and this cycle of hatred, it never stopped. He reveals that Helos is a fabrication and says that it was Fritz who moved as many Eldians as he could to Paradis and erected the walls, vowing to use the rumbling if anyone disturbed the island. For most of the world, all of this is true. We know that the rest of the world was told that the rumbling would absolutely be used if anyone attacked the island, which is why the walls stood for over 100 years. The Tiber family, on the other hand, was told of the vow to renounce war, which, if you remember the differences between the anime and the manga, is actually a very, very big deal. The anime never implied that Marley was certain that there would be no retaliation. Obviously, they must have at least suspected that it was a bluff, because they do straight up send an army to break open the walls, you know? But the entire plan in the anime was shrouded in a whole lot more uncertainty. In the manga, on the other hand, the Tibers are explicitly referenced. So the Marley leadership was absolutely certain that the rumbling was not a real threat, and that is why they were the first ones to actually land on Paradis. That's a whole separate tangent though, because hold up, this is a pretty major retcon for the all Marleyan population, because what do you mean we are not the good guys and Helos was not our great hero? This is Willie's hook, line, and sinker. He just throws the entire narrative upside down. It was not Marley, or the Tibers, or some great hero that saved their nation. It was an Eldian. Remember that Willie's goal is to save the Eldians and to finally unite the people of Marley as a greater whole. So with the reputation he has in both Marleyan and Eldian circles, him retconning their own history becomes an irrefutable fact. We've talked about controlling the narrative and the messengers of said narrative back on Parody, but surely no one here can call Willie an Eldian devil, and if he says Eldians as a whole are also not devils, well then, they're not. But wait a minute, if they are not devils, and the rumbling was never a thing, then why did we attack the island? Are we the baddies? The answer is yes, so now we shift to propaganda mode. The Eldians have been cleared, but for most of Marley history, they have always been used as the scapegoat for basically all problems. So now, Marley needs something else to pin all the blame on, and that will be the island. Willie again emphasizes that the man they perceived as the most despicable king on the planet just wanted peace, saying if Marley ever grew powerful enough to breach the walls, he'd accept whatever judgment they perceived as just. If you recall what I said at the top of the episode, this is where that through line of judgment and atonement really comes together. The farm dude couldn't bear the weight of his perceived guilt and put an end to the suffering. He judged himself, sparing no mercy. King Fritz simply bowed, allowing whoever or whatever might judge him to do as they please. He wished to simply fade away in his ignorant dream. And finally, we have Reiner. And we'll get to Reiner. And the music as that bombshell drops, oh my god, it's so good.
Doesn't actually pose a threat, right?
This track is very fittingly called Attonement, and I absolutely love just how many emotions all at once it conveys. Is this remorseful, uncertain, and conflicted tune? But there is also this degree of melancholy. The constantly escalating strings are gone, and now is just acceptance. It's ignorant bliss, but there's still that question of how did we end up here? But at this point in Willie's story, sure, Parody might have accepted any attack, but if they were just chilling there, attacking them still makes no sense, right? If you want to paint yourself out to be as the ultimate arbiter of morality, this would just be petty revenge. Like, they wanted peace, we could have just talked to them, right? Why did we attack them? And so the crowd erupts in chatter about how their entire history is a lie, their symbols of honor are a lie, what was the invasion even meant to achieve, and generally, the very fabric of Marley's existence comes apart at the seams. Everything from their ideology to the decades-long conquest to even the stories they tell their children is all just a lie. This is another large-scale demolition, if you will. And so, at the height of that chaos, comes Willie's final act. But not before another excellent motif in the music.
Family joined hands with King Fritz. We became heroes to the world. I stand before you, willingly pardoned with my false glory.
That moment of Willie now accepting judgment is so good. I wish I had the vocabulary to describe this stuff because it feels almost surreal in nature, as if it was all just this myth, but it's not. It sounds almost like a guiding track for a folktale, only like really sad and miserable. If you want to overanalyze though, if we focus on that through line of judgment, then Willie here is experiencing that in just about every way imaginable. There is the social judgment of being shamed in front of quite literally the entire world. There is the personal shame of admitting all of it in the first place and condemning your own bloodline's history. There's also that more symbolic sign of this blinding light singling out him and him alone. There's the angle of him setting up this plan as judgment for himself. And by the end of this episode, well, that guillotine of sorts does indeed drop and it's like the ultimate and final form of judgment. But this is all one big play, so now it is time for the tragic twist. Magath is told that all the warriors have disappeared, which wasn't exactly a part of the plan, but...
Looks like it's begun.
Willie looks to Laura, the Warhammer Titan and one of the pillars that is the Tiber House, asking her to witness his resolve. This is that recurring motif of accepting and wanting judgment. Last episode, we already saw him talk about how the weight, it's too much to bear. So here, he's asking them to accept the sacrifice as almost payment. She might be the younger sister, and she's not the head of the house, but her holding the Warhammer does kinda override all of that. So this is him essentially speaking to his lineage as a whole. And as the drums kick in, the very familiar Colossal Titan motif kicks in.
盾と矛として平和を守ってきました。その名は
If you still had any doubts as to where the story was going in the long term, then here it is. The story we had seen thus far has well and truly been flipped on its head. As Willie talks about the walls and how they've acted as both a spear and a shield to protect the world's peace, we shift focus toward the one who would be upsetting said peace. Once upon a time, that would have been the Colossal Titan looming over the wall, its hand crushing it with impunity as it effectively started what would become the next Great Titan War. Today, however, the Colossal's theme, it is sounding for Eren. And because this is Attack on Titan, where seemingly every single creative decision is orchestrated even between the different creative departments, I think the single clearest example of that are the posters of Season 1 and 4. The person we are standing behind and the person attacking has entirely flipped. Willie says the king was overthrown and their ideology of peace is no more, saying the name of the rebel is Eren Yeager. And just like that, all of that chaos Willie himself stirred up by literally telling the world that they'd been openly lying to them for decades, is channeled at a single person and what he represents. This is not about Eldians, it is about Paradis Island, and it is about Eren. But just as importantly, we have Falco staring in disbelief as Eren's leg regrows. At this point, how could he not believe what Willie is saying? He is Eren atop the wall, watching as Reiner blatantly reveals his abilities as a shifter. He respected him, trusted him, helped him, but the entire time, he was just being used. And then, there is the next bit of realization. The letter. Falco realizes what he just invited into their home. I liken it to the Warrior reveal, but this is infinitely worse. This is like the Warrior reveal, but Marley's airships fly in and yoink Eren. Personal pain is one thing, but he just pulled his entire country into this. But at the same time, and promise this won't be a tangent, I also want to immediately note that, because of what happens next, this betrayal doesn't galvanize his support for Marley, or support for their mission, or anything really. Eren personally betrayed him and personally put this tragedy on his shoulders. But even so, Falco never becomes fueled by rage or revenge. Eren, all the way back in episode 2, promised to defeat anything and everything beyond the walls. It's only in Return to Shiganshina, when Armin's life is on the line, that he realizes he's been lost in the sauce. He hasn't actually been fighting for his friends. He's telling himself that that's what he's doing, but he's not really. With Falco, everything after this point is about protecting Gabby. Not once does he speak of attacking anyone. But okay, I promise it's not going to be a tangent, so hold that thought for a second, because Willie then drops, like the coolest named thing of all time, the rumbling. The editing here is an absolute chef's kiss. The Colossal's theme really kicking into high gear as we get this flutter cut of the rumbling, and the crowd reacting to the rumbling back to the crowd. It's unrelenting. Remember, this is a dude just talking on a stage, but it genuinely feels like the walls are already closing in on us. I just realized that's kind of a pun because the walls. It's the walls, but I did mean the walls. Anyway.
Which means he could begin the rumbling at any moment.
Also, you have to admit, Armin was riding fire with the whole humanity being caged like birds. But Willie's line also goes unfathomably hard. Humanity will be powerless but to cower in the fear of the footfalls of the apocalypse. And by the way, the dub version goes equally hard.
Except flee in vain from the sound of earth-shaking steps that will herald our doom.
But alright, let's get back to our 2.5 buddies. Eren says everything Willie said is correct, saying he is the bad guy. But immediately saying, to him, they look like the bad guy. Everything from the music to the narrators is drawing a very clear parallel between Paradis and what we are about to witness. That day the wall was destroyed, when Titans destroyed my home. I watched my mother be eaten right in front of me. As Eren says this, we cut to Falco, whose eyes dart to Eren. People often joke about what would happen if you watched Season 4 and then Season 1 to 3 as a prequel of sorts. I think Falco's point of view is a pretty good estimate. We have the warrior Reiner, the sole survivor returning from the harrowing mission that tore apart the elite warrior squad on the island of Paradis. he returned to his mother, scarred and broken. But on the other side, he has the friendly Mr. Kruger, supposedly the devil of Paradis, usurping the peaceful king. But his mother died when Reiner broke the wall. He, a kid, lost his mother because of them. What does this have to do with the rumbling? What does this have to do with the king? Falco's mind is short-circuiting here because neither story makes sense. These next 3 minutes are probably the most succinct encapsulation of the series, while also being the most gut-wrenching, cruel, but beautiful interaction in the entire story. Eren coldly starts to press Reiner, like an interrogator continuously applying more and more pressure. First asking, why was his mother eaten, and just waiting for an answer. Reiner has just given up on any kind of autonomy. He wants Eren's judgment. He will do whatever he is told to. The only thing that's keeping him going is Gabi, Falco, and his closest. That is it. There is no illusions of a heroic mission, of Marley as a great nation, of good and bad. There is nothing. He is a walking corpse, marching through hell over and over, clinging onto the hope that something lies on the other side. He can't even pull the trigger to end it, the memory of Eren haunting him at every step. And then, almost like some messed up guardian angel, he just shows up. The arbiter he has been hoping for years. The one who can and should be the one to condemn him, to do the cruelest things to him. But there is no condemnation. Eren calmly asks, why did you destroy the wall? Reiner answers saying, it was to infiltrate the walls. Eren keeps pressing, asking, what was your mission? He too wants to understand why he did it. When Reiner breached the wall, he told himself that he can't give up without understanding a thing. That is also why Eren is here, to ask why did this have to happen. It's not about vengeance, it's not about punishing Reiner. It's about just understanding why his life had to be ruined, why his mother and father had to die. It's almost like this existential plea for just making sense of anything. How can these two people who slept in the same dorm for years tear each other's family apart with their own bare hands? Reiner finally responds, to reclaim the founder and to save the world. To which Eren responds with, I see, if you were trying to save the world, I guess you didn't have a choice, did you? I think this is one of the most misinterpreted, or maybe purposely ignored things, because a lot of people also seem to do that, because it's always been baffling to me when people say Reiner, and of course also Bear Spray and Annie, should have seen through Marley's propaganda, it is all their fault, etc, etc. Because, no, and that's exactly what the story is about. This scene is Reiner wanting that judgment. He wants someone, most of all Eren, to put him down right here, right now, and to tell him, yes, it was all your fault. That blood is on your hands and no one else's. Everything that has happened and will happen is because of you. Just like we saw with Gross staring right through the camera and speaking to us, this is the same thing. We as the audience followed Eren, we know of the horrifying things that Reiner has done, and we want to judge him for it. But that is not what happens. Eren calmly tells him, I understand. I guess you didn't have a choice. Suddenly, there is deafening silence. The Colossal's theme cuts out completely, and all that's left is Reiner saying he still remembers Eren's promise. The promise that he'd make them suffer the worst deaths imaginable. So he then just asks, is that why you're here? Eren tells him to forget all about it, saying, at first, he thought everyone beyond the sea was an enemy. But after sleeping under the same roof and eating the same food...
Reiner, お前と同じだよ.
As a chilling piano plays, he says he realized they were all just people. Some good, some bad, but all people, inside the walls and out. As he talks about how, even as kids, they were taught that the Paradisians are devils, we get a flashback to episode 61, where we already saw him looking over the cool Uncle Reiner with his little flock of kids. A sight that clearly doesn't signal some monster breaking through the walls for sports. Eren says that's what they pounded into little kids who didn't know any better. Then asking, what could a kid like you have done? And oh boy, that single line is beautiful, and I think is at the heart of this entire story. Blaming Reiner is the easy answer. Kid or not, he broke the wall. He spent years alongside the scouts, and he still attacked them. It's been 100 years since the Great Titan War ended, generations have passed. This is a very clear-cut case. Eren and Paradis are the victims. But Reiner is also a victim. He is a symptom of the problem, just like Eren in Season 4 and beyond. The problem is the machine that made this possible, made this an inevitability in the first place. But again, that also doesn't make sense. That's just not how people see things, and really, that's just not how the real world works. It's easy to talk about these big picture ideals and how Reiner was brainwashed, yada yada, but he knows what he did, and he knows that he is guilty. How could you ever explain something like that? How could you ever even try to begin to justify tearing someone's life apart and trying to act as a victim, even if you quite literally are one? It's an inescapable contradiction where neither are at fault, but also both are, or would be. Eren, being the first ever person in his entire lifetime to offer him sympathy and understanding, just breaks him. To have someone, let alone Eren, who he hurt and betrayed, come up to him and feel pity for him. To have him ask, what could he have even done? To comfort him, saying he's been suffering this entire time. To basically absolve him of everything. It's cruel that of all the people this should have been, it's Eren, but it is also so beautiful. Reiner falls to his knees. He rejects Eren's words. Everything comes undone as all that trauma just comes pouring out. He says when Marcel got eaten, he told them to keep going. They wanted to go home, but he forced them to keep going. He says it wasn't to save himself, it was because he wanted to be a hero. He wants Eren's blame, just like he blames himself, to tell him it's your selfishness, your blindness and ignorance that killed my mom. But no matter how much Reiner keeps pushing him, Eren never blames him. No matter what he says, no matter how many wounds he tries opening up, Eren never speaks a word. And as if that wasn't peak enough, we cut to Willy, who says he always hated his blood, saying he wished for nothing more than Eldians to be eradicated. And oh my god, the flutter cut between Reiner begging on the ground saying he can't take it anymore, begging and pleading with Eren to just do something, anything to free him, and Willy, it's so absurdly messed up and so cruel, but it is also the purest expression of the human heart. Going from Reiner begging for it all to be over to Willy's "but I don't want to die" is the epitome of the duality within Eren and really the entire narrative of Attack on Titan. It's the belief in true good, in the beauty of life and hope. The belief that people are just people. They understand one another, regardless of what happened 100 years ago. They are not the sins of their ancestors. They are people as they are today, pure and free. But it is also the cruel reality of today. One that was set in motion by generations past, constantly barreling toward oblivion, perpetuated by those same broken people. When Willy says he doesn't want to die because he was born into this world, we cut to Eren. He realizes that he is about to destroy his mother's legacy. This is the moment where Eren goes from being that hero fighting for just his world's survival to a monster of his own making. He will kill Willy, who too was special for no other reason than being born into this world. He will destroy this entire apartment building of, in his own words, ordinary citizens, ordinary Eldians. And far, far later, the twist that he was the one who diverted Dina to his own mother in the first place. We'll talk about it plenty more in the following episode, but there is a very good reason why Eren would not be a point of view character. This is where he becomes the monsters that he kills. As the now somber piano plays and Willy makes a plea for all of them to unite and simply allow themselves to live, Eren smiles. He reaches out with the bloodstained hand as Willy's plea for their strength sounds in the background. Reached out and clasped hands are a huge symbol of that unbreakable bond and trust in the series. Ones we've seen plenty of times with Reiner and Eren specifically, but here, it is stained in blood. It is an omen of all the death in the past, and it is an omen of all the destruction that is still yet to follow. They are brothers, both turned monsters by the cruelty of the world. He hates himself, and he hates Reiner, but in that is a bond, an understanding, and true melancholy. As he helps Reiner up, we hear Willy scream about the Paradisian devils, only for Eren to say, "I was probably born this way." I always read this as him admitting that both of them, they are slaves to freedom. Both of them were born into this world, molded by it, and set on this path of destruction under the guise of saving their world. Just like Reiner becoming a warrior never changed a single thing, and he never understood any of it, Eren's path of destruction also leads nowhere. He is a slave to freedom. And as we focus on Eren, he proclaims that he will keep moving forward.
A declaration of war!
Okay, all of this has been super dark, super depressing. Now for a completely different tangent, this is one of very few scenes in the entire series where I honestly don't know which roar I prefer. For like 99% of Titan stuff, I always prefer the sub. The dub always seemed a bit too high-pitched and weirdly echoey in my mind, and it's just kind of weirdly mastered. I'm not a huge fan. But in this scene, it being a slightly higher pitch and having that ear-piercing quality, yet still being a guttural roar, I think also works extremely well. Let's be honest though, it's really cool either way. And with that, that is episode 64. What is there to say about this episode? The funniest thing is, this is a setup episode. Normally, you would expect episode 65, like the actual Raid on Liberio, to overshadow this setup. But it never does, because the Eren and Reiner conversation is just that good. We'll of course talk about it plenty more next time, but I've got no idea how people can listen to this conversation and then say that later in Season 4, Eren is behaving out of character when right here, he basically says, Reiner, we're the same because we're both chasing a dream that's not actually there, and you know it's not there. You say that it's not there. You say you want it to be respected, right? Eren says the same thing. That's why they're the same. So it's very weird. And then, like, if we go past all of this, that's why Reiner has a pseudo-redemption arc that Eren never does, and Eren later admits that to Armin. Anyway, we'll talk about all of that. Now, we have actually caught up to where I started making YouTube videos, so it is time for the Raid on Liberio. So, I hope to see you back as we continue overanalyzing Attack on Titan. And that's the video. No more yappers, I only want to mention two things. The Dark Souls 2 streams have started and I'm doing those over at Twitch. If you want to catch up, the VODs are also on the second channel, Korotos TV. And number two, if you've made it all the way to the end of the video, I have a super secret special Discord that I still haven't set up properly, but it is there. That's like the 100% guaranteed way of not missing anything I do, so if you want to join that, it's in the description. Alright, that's it. No more yappers. With that, I want to say a massive thank you to our current patrons and YouTube members who allow me to produce even more of these for you all. And let's also give a warm welcome to the newest members of the team. No, not you. Benjamin Shimel, I think. And Josh Budagzewski, I think. Sorry if I butchered the name. But without you, there'd be a whole lot less of my rambling, so seriously, thank you, thank you. Other than that, I want to say thank you very much for watching. I hope you have a great day, and hopefully, I'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye.